5 times. 5 times he stood before the people of Kenya and asked for their trust. 5 times he lost. He was jailed without trial. He was beaten in the dark. He was exiled from the country he loved. The system was designed to destroy him. It did not work because Raila Odinga did not fight to win an election. He fought to build a nation. And what he left behind after 5 defeats, decades of struggle, and one final act of grace will change how you think about power, sacrifice, and what it means to lead. To understand Raila Odinga, you must first understand the world he was born into. Kenya in 1945 was a country under British colonial control. The land, the resources, and the rule all belonged to someone else. The people of Kenya were searching for voices that would speak for them, leaders who would not bow. Raila Odinga was born on January 7, 1945 in Masano, Kisumu County in Western Kenya. His father, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, was one of architects of independence and the first vice president of Kenya. But power in Kenya was never simple. Jaramogi broke with President Jomo Kenyatta in 1966. The disagreement became a political rift. Jaramogi was detained in 1969 and held in prison for nearly 2 years. The young Raila watched his father taken away. He saw what happened when he refused to be silent. That lesson never left him. For his education, Raila traveled far. He studied mechanical engineering in East Germany during the Cold War. He lived on both sides of the most divided cities in the world. He crossed checkpoint Charlie with his Kenyan passport. He saw what oppression looked like. He saw what freedom looked like. He returned to Kenya in 1970 and built a promising life. But Kenya was calling him towards something harder. And the moment he answered that call, everything changed. Not just for Raila, for the entire country. By the late 1970s, Kenya had become one-party state under President Daniel Arap Moi. Dissidence was not tolerated. Oppositions was treated as treason. Raila began pushing for multi-party democracy. It was a dangerous position and it would cost him everything. In 1982, a faction of the Kenyan Air Force attempted a coup against the government. The coup failed, but the government used it as an excuse to round up dissidents. Raila Odinga was accused of involvement and detained without trial. He spent 6 years in prison. In one facility, deep inside a wildlife reserve, escape meant walking into territory full of predators. In another prison, the infamous Nyayo House in Nairobi, Raila was kept in solitary confinement. He was blindfolded. He was beaten during interrogation. In 1984, his mother died. The authorities kept the news from him for 2 months. To keep his spirit alive, Raila went on hunger strike. Every night, he shouted into the darkness so that other inmates would know he was still alive. He said, "I wanted everyone to hear me. I refused to die quietly." 6 years in prison did not silence him. It forged him. And what he did when he walked free was something no one had anticipated. Upon his release, Raila was arrested twice more. Each time, he refused to stop. In 1991, he fled to Norway. When Moi's grips began to weaken, Raila returned as one of the key architects of Kenya's multi-party democracy. His voice was electric. His connection to ordinary Kenyans was real. In 1992, he won a seat in parliament. In 1997, Raila ran for president for the first time. He finished third. Most men would have retreated. Raila made a move that shocked everyone. In 2001, Raila Odinga aligned himself with President Moi, the very man whose government had jailed him. Critics call it a betrayal. Supporters call it strategy. He joined the government as a Minister of Energy, extending rural electrification across Kenya. He was building a national profile. But the alliance fell apart in 2002. Moi chose Uhuru Kenyatta as his successor, bypassing Raila completely. Raila felt betrayed. He led a mass deflection from the ruling party, formed a new party, and joined forces with Mwai Kibaki to build the National Rainbow Coalition. This coalition ended 4 decades of single-party rule. When Kibaki was badly injured in a car accident just weeks before the election, it was Raila who electrified the campaign. His rallying cry, Kibaki Tosha, became the slogan that carried the coalition to a historic victory. Raila was appointed Minister of Roads, Public Works and Housing. It looked like the beginning of a new era. It did not last, because within 3 years, the alliance that had changed Kenya would crack open, and what happened next would push the country to the edge of collapse. By 2005, Raila and Kibaki were at war over constitutional reforms. Raila led the no campaign in the referendum. The government lost. The Orange movement became the Orange Democratic Movement, the ODM, and Raila became its flag bearer. In October 2007, Nairobi's Uhuru Park filled with more than 50,000 supporters. Opinion polls showed Raila ahead. When Kenyans went to the polls on December 27, Raila appeared to be leading. Then the numbers changed. On December 30th, the head of the Electoral Commission announced Kibaki the winner by approximately 230,000 votes. Days later, he admitted he was not certain who had actually won. Kenya erupted. Accusations of election thefts turned into violence. The violence spread fast, taking on ethnic dimensions. As old rivalries resurfaced, more than 1,000 people were killed. Over 600,000 were forced from their homes. For nearly 2 months, Kenya was bleeding. Peace returned only because of one man's intervention, and a deal that would give Raila power, but never quite the power he had fought for. Former United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan brokered a power-sharing agreement in 2008. Raila Odinga became Prime Minister in a coalition government under President Kibaki. It was an uneasy peace, and yet in the middle of this dysfunction, Raila championed the 2010 Constitution. It strengthened regional governance, entrenched multi-party democracy, and created a new Bill of Rights. It became one of the proudest achievements of his historical life. If you are learning something new today, subscribe to African Profile. We publish a new story every week. African kings, warriors, and leaders that most of the world has never heard. Just hit subscribe so you do not miss the next one. In 2013, Raila ran for president again. He lost to Uhuru Kenyatta by a narrow margin. He took the case to the Supreme Court. The court upheld the results. Raila conceded gracefully. In 2017, he ran again. The Supreme Court of Kenya annulled the presidential election results, citing widespread irregularities. It was the first annulment of a presidential election in African history. But Raila refused to participate in the rerun. The rerun went ahead without him. Kenyatta won with 98% of the vote. Raila held a symbolic swearing-in at Uhuru Park, declaring himself the people's president. And then, on March 9, 2018, something happened that nobody had predicted. The moment that defined the final chapter of his political life. Raila and Uhuru Kenyatta shook hands in public in front of cameras without warning. They pleaded to work together to heal the nation, fight corruption, and address long-standing injustice. It was called the handshake, and it changed everything. In 2022, with Kenyatta's backing, Raila ran for president one final time. He lost to William Ruto. The Supreme Court upheld the results. 5 runs, 5 defeats. And yet, Kenya is different because Raila Odinga existed. Kenya has a new constitution because he fought for it. Kenya has multi-party democracy because he refused to accept one-party rule. Kenya has a Supreme Court that annulled a presidential election because the institution he helped build was strong enough to do it. He did not win the presidency, but he built the country that could one day have a president worth electing. In his final years, Raila became a statesman. In March 2025, President William Ruto appointed Raila as a special envoy to help mediate the crisis in South Sudan. His former rival trusted him with peace. In 2024, he ran for the chairmanship of the African Union Commission. He lost. The fact that he ran, that Kenya's most persistent opposition figure stood for the leadership of a continent, said something how Africa saw him. Raila Odinga died on October 15, 2025, aged 80, while receiving medical treatment in India. President William Ruto described him as a once-in-a-generation leader, a giant of democracy, and a patriot who gave everything to make Kenya better. The greatest measure of a leader is not whether they won, but whether the country they left behind is stronger than the one they found. By that measure, Raila Odinga won everything. Winning is not the only way to change history. He was jailed. He was beaten. He was exiled. He lost 5 elections. And with every loss, he could have chosen silence, comfort, or bitterness. He chose to keep showing up in the courtroom, at the rally, at the negotiating table, and finally at the handshake. The greatest leaders are not always the ones who win. Sometimes they are the ones who refuse to stop fighting for what is right until the world around them finally becomes the thing they were fighting for. That was Raila Odinga. If this story moved you, share it with one person who needs to hear it. And if you want to discover more stories like this one, stories of African leaders who changed history, subscribe to African Profile. A new story comes every week. And next, watch our next story because it connects directly to what you just learned here. I will see you in the next one.